Today in the Skid Factory, we're going to pull down the Barra and Turbo 400 and give them some lovin'. Welcome back to the Barra Factory. Before we begin, and while I remember, we've got a bunch of merch in stock, Kevo shirts and hoodies, and there's a discount code for you to receive a discount. All you got to do is use the code Roger in the store to find out what that discount is. And if you spend over, I think it's 90 bucks, we're going to throw in you a free prize, stickers or key tags, something like that. All right, Barras. I've done a couple of builds in the past. One of them being Millsy's Bedford. That engine was a pretty well max effort engine, 3.8 litre D-stroke engine, fire ringed head, quite a crazy build when it comes to Barras. The other engine we built was for Wayne's XE Falcon wagon. That started as a $200 Barra, which we then threw rods, pistons, a girdle. We did get a little bit carried away, but that engine is well capable of making over 1,000 horsepower, and that's what you would do if you were to build a Barra. The other option is to start with an FG turbo engine. These are getting a bit hard to come by these days though, so this engine, I would probably say to buy this would be maybe $6,000, thereabouts-ish. I paid $3,000 for this from ACM Parts like 5 years ago, so that's why we got it, and it's just sat on the shelf, awaiting the moment now where we can hook in and do all the good stuff to it. For those of you who aren't familiar, from BF2 onwards, all the turbo variants had stronger rods, and these engines are well capable of making, I think I've seen 800-900 horsepower from standard bottom ends, but they can't do it from dead stock. You do need to do a few upgrades. So we got onto the blokes at Goleby's Parts, and they have delivered us a care package. What you're gonna need to do to your FG turbo engine is a few things. Oil pump gears, the standard gears in these are sintered metal and they will shatter when they're under high load, and it's a known failure. It will destroy your engine. So oil pump gears. I've also got a backing plate. I haven't gone for the whole oil pump. The other thing that will set you back is valve springs. Kelford cams have got valve springs available. I've also opted for a set of cams because the FG engines do suffer from pitting in the valve train in the cam lobes. Next thing along the line, more power means higher cylinder pressures. So to keep the head on, we've got some 12mm tool steel head studs. They're also from Goleby's Parts. I've also got a timing chain kit because I don't really know how many Ks are on this engine. I'm assuming it's low, but it could be an old taxi engine, I don't know. So it could have 300,000 Ks on it. So I've got a whole timing chain kit to go in it. And then right at the front of the engine, we have got our Ross Performance Parts Gold Series balancer. That one's getting thrown on there because these engines can suffer from a harmonic balancer failure, and it's a bad time if that happens. So because I'm making a bit more power from standard, I do want to throw that on the front there to keep everything on there, keep the vibrations at a minimum. So that's all we're going to do today. We've got it on the engine stand. We put the turbo on the inlet manifold on there so it looked good for a thumbnail, but we've got to rip all this stuff off, get the head off. We're going to get the head serviced. I might look in the bottom end, check some mains, check some big ends. I don't know if I should just leave it the lucky wrecker engine and don't check it, but once we get down there, we'll see how we go. So once we get this done, we're then going to go and see our mate Mark and get the transmission checked and serviced. It's already been built, but it's been sitting for 5 years, so it could be a bit of corrosion inside there, and Mark wants to go over it and update it with some new parts. So engine first, then we'll get stuck into the transmission. Let's do it. Looks pretty fresh, eh?
Looks alright.
Don't know why we didn't pull the valve cover off 5 years ago. Or maybe we did, I just can't remember.
Did we?
I don't think we did.
Yeah, I don't remember that. Well, you might have because this is broken. This contraption here is how they get oil pressure for the turbo on Barra turbo engines. These are problematic. There is a screen of some description in here, and that blocking up and losing oil pressure to the turbos was a big thing. That's why a lot of engines will have a secondary line on it with another filter on it that you have to service. So we're actually taking the whole thing off because we've got a remote oil filter and other things. We've got plenty of ports to use for oil. You can also use this temp port if you've got an aftermarket ECU. Remove that, you can have your oil pressure temp in here and your feed there. So it opens up a few more options. It all looks pretty good. It's either very low kilometres or it's been replaced. Who knows?
Should I return that timing chain kit to Golby's or what?
How much you like your new engine. Got the cylinder head off and we're having a quick look to see what the bores and piston tops look like. Number 6 looks like it's been cleaned, which is a sign of perhaps water entering the cylinder. I don't really know. The head gasket is actually quite degraded from the engine sitting for a long time, and so is the water pump. So leaving engines sit around is not necessarily a great idea, but we'll deal with it. We'll give this head, like the block deck surface, a clean up and clean up all the carbon that's built up. There's a lot of carbon built up, which usually means it hasn't been driven very hard, but it was a manual engine, which usually means it is driven hard, so who knows. It's a bit of a lucky dip when you got stuff like this. We've decided not to delve in any further and have a look at anything else because it's a Pandora's box and we'll end up with pistons and rods in it next week if we do that. So we want to leave it as is. It does look very clean otherwise, so who knows. We'll get that head down to the cylinder head shop and get it faced, and also the valves checked for sealing, and when that's back we'll bolt it back on and get some Kelford camshafts in and put it back together.
Where'd you learn that one, donkey?
From being a mechanic for 30 years.
I've got the cylinder head back from the machine shop, nothing crazy of a job, basic service and a skim. We've also replaced the valve springs and retainers with a set from Kelford Cams. The valve float is a common issue with Barras. Once you start making some more horsepower comes from more boost, which is acting on the intake valve. The other thing on the exhaust side is exhaust manifold pressure. Barras suffer from exhaust manifold pressure with different size turbos. We've got a sensor on the Barra actually, so we can monitor that, but exhaust pressure will act on the exhaust valve. We are replacing the cams too with a set from Kelford Cams. These are a set of 218B cams, 280 degree duration. The standard Barra cams are known for like the lobe wear pitting. I'm not too sure if it's an FG thing specifically or if it was throughout the whole range, but we weren't too sure. This engine's been sitting up on a pallet. We didn't pull the valve cover off. I assumed that it had high Ks. I assumed that they were going to be buggered, which is why we've got a set. The other advantage to Kelford cams is that they make power way more efficiently with a set of cams in them compared to the standard lift, so that's definitely a plus. We're about to chuck the cylinder head on, but we have to clean up the deck surface first. As you saw when we pulled this off, there was carbon and crap everywhere. It was evidence of number 6 being blown out too, so to do this we're going to use a knife stone. We've done this before on a few engines too. We've got 2 here. Which one's the better one, Alan? Which one's newer? We've done this in a few engines. Basically, knife stones are flat surface and coarse, so we can rub this down on the deck surface to clean it off. People might be worried about spitting schmutz down through the galleries, but we've got the cover off and the sump off so we can wash it out too. So this is what you do when you do a cylinder head anyway. The old mate that's replacing your head at the cylinder at the shop's just going to bloody blast it off.
I don't think they'll be using a knife stone, they'll be using a scraper and...
No, they use the Scotch-Brite Whizzer, the Whizzer pads. This is good to go.
It's like high end compared to
the shinier the surface, the cleaner the seal. I know what you're thinking.
You gotta paint everything.
Oh, it takes 3 minutes.
Been longer than 3 minutes.
And then 4 hours to dry.
Got a set of head studs from Golebys. They just go into the block. There's no, it's the original size, which is 12 by 1.75, except the studs have got a fine thread on the top, which is pretty standard when converting from metric to imperial for the types of fasteners that you use for head bolts. Usually are different threads on each end. So we're doing 50, 80, 100 foot-pound on this one.
3 equal stages. It then says to check them half an hour later and then check them after the engine's running. Are you going to do that? No. My back's hurting just watching you do that.
Probably notice that we're using this fancy torque wrench that beeps at you when it's all torqued up. This is basically a tester for ToolPro X. We've used it on a few different engines and compared it to a bunch of other stuff. This is part of what we do for ToolPro, is test their upcoming products. So it seems to be a good thing. We've tested it against multiple other wrenches and that comes up trumps. So that should be out, I don't know, at some stage at Super Cheap. Hopefully it'll hold it. One of the things you might come across when you're working on a Barra is that people tend to break off the valve cover bolts. They're like a long bolt with a shank on the end of them, so they bottom out. And And if you do them up with an air tool, or not an air tool, like a battery tool, most of them have got enough grunt to just shear the thing off, which has happened twice on this particular engine. I've done it myself, so be aware, do them up by hand, they're just weak. So we've got to get this out so we can get a new bolt for it. There's a couple of ways you can go about that. You've probably seen plenty of TikTok videos of some dude welding a nut onto there or something like that. You don't really need to do that in this case. And this is a precision bit of gear, like that's been tunnel or line bored to suit the camshaft tunnels. So we're just going to do it the old school way, which is just an easy out. And I've already got one of them out, so I know it works. So we have prepared for this. So basic stuff, you can buy easy outs from any tool shop. I'm sure Supercheap's got a good range of them. Let's get it out.
That one time you go to film something and it doesn't work.
It's an easy out, they never work. Easy outs are shit. The end. Don't be ham-fisted with your Barra valve cover. It makes me angry. Now we've got the head bolted down, the next step is to put the timing chain on, but before we do that we need to address the oil pump issue. Breakage of oil pump gears is a thing with Barras and lots of other engines. The reason for this is these are made of powdered metal, so it's basically a compressed powdered metal, and they work fine until they don't, and then they just snap in half, and then you end up like an RB with broken pump gears and a dead engine. So this is a basic upgrade that most people would do. They can do it. You can do it in the car even. So it's billet gears, or not powdered metal gears. I don't like to use the word billet because it doesn't really mean anything these days. And the other thing you can do, which is optional, is a steel backing plate. So that's your back plate that goes over the pump. That's aluminium. I guess at some point that's going to have less of a load capability than steel, so none of this stuff costs much, so it's just basic insurance for keeping your engine alive. So all we got to do is basically pull out that stuff and replace it with this stuff. If you've got high Ks on your engine, you have to check obviously for damage to things and scores and that sort of thing, but this engine doesn't look like it's done much work, so we just got to throw it all together and off we go. Last thing that's got to go back in is the relief valve. I pulled this out just to wash the pump up and make sure it was all right. This thing's pretty important. If it gets stuck, it usually gets stuck open and you end up with no oil pressure and a dead engine as well. So make sure you pull these out and just have a quick look over them and make sure it moves freely while you got the whole thing out.
Remember when people used to hang chains off their wallets in their pockets? You could put that around your neck.
Not chains this big, surely.
What's your rap name? Put it around your neck and give me a gang sign.
That's the big clock at the bottom. MC who?
MC Motronic 36-1. Enter the chamber. Maybe that's what they were talking about. I haven't actually done a barra chain before. It's a little bit different. I've just got a tooth out.
Always double check those timing marks, Alan.
The last piece of the timing chain puzzle is the tensioner. Now these things can fail, and they're much more likely to fail if they're not a genuine part, so the recommendation is to just use a genuine Ford tensioner because they're the most reliable. We have had that problem before, so we won't go there again because it's a big pain in the ass when you've got to pull the whole front of the engine down just to replace that. So, genuine only, kids.
Geez, how much sealant do you want in these bras?
Some rookie made a hash job of this, I tell you. A couple of the water pump bolts actually go through into the jacket, so just to ensure there's no weepage, we just put a bit of aviation sealant on there. They did come with a factory sealant, but it's been polished off. You notice we knocked a water pump pulley off. They're actually not supposed to come with a pulley on them because you can't get at one of the bolts, but the aftermarket ones do. But we're also just changing it because they're plastic and they do tend to melt, basically, when you're giving the engines a hard time, and there's a lot of crankshaft torque going on. So each pulley, most of them were plastic, so we're going to replace them all with a steel variant, which you can just buy from a part shop. They're readily available. You do need this special tool, but it's not very expensive, so invest. Inline sixes are generally known for their smoothness and vibration-free motoring, except for Barras. It's something to do with the size of it, the bore and stroke. They have a lot of vibration issues, and they're also very big. So a harmonic balancer serves a few purposes. One of them is just to have a pulley on it. That's not really the balancer side of things. Inside of it, it's basically got a spring, for want of a better term. The spring in this case is a type of rubber, and that rubber, the spring, is matched to the crankshaft's torsional vibration needs. So this is basically damping out vibrations that occur from the flywheel end up to the front of the crankshaft here. Those sort of vibrations are what cause breakages of crankshafts, fatigue breakages. So a lot of diesel engines have fatigue breakages from that sort of thing, and this, using particularly an aftermarket balancer that's got a lot more put into it than a factory balancer. They would put the least amount of goodness into a factory balancer as they can afford. So this is a Ross Performance Parts balancer. It's a gold series. SFI approved as well. If you're racing, you need something that's basically called explosion proof, they used to call it back in the day when flywheels used to go through bell housings and feet. But so it's rated for that as well, but it's basically a kind of a protection factor for the engine to help keep it alive. And particularly if you've got an older engine that the balancer's just dead, they can fly apart, separate, all sorts of things, because it is actually bonded internally. We pretty much use these on every engine build we do nowadays. They also come with an underdrive pulley if you specify it. So I don't know how you would, but if you're revving the dinger out of a Barra, it's not normally that easy to do. But I guess if you're like a burnout car or something like that, and you've raised the limiter.
What about Guy King's K20?
You might, yeah.
Where's that thing to the moon?
That's true. Maybe he should have an underdrive balancer. They also, if you're real serious into building a really serious engine and you're going with the dry sump, that's all specified for dry sump arbors and that sort of stuff, and fuel pump drives, that sort of thing. Let's bolt this sucker on.
The old Allen would have just used the bolt to screw it on.
The Allen that doesn't have one of these tools would do that, yeah. Except the bolt wouldn't reach, so be hammering it on with a bit of wood.
We did that with Dave's car, didn't we? I remember we didn't film it because we were ashamed of doing it.
What?
Dave's BK and this big sledgy and a big chunk of wood.
Probably.
Just look at it. I reckon that's a sick colour.
Thousands would disagree.
If you ever need a workbench in a hurry, just grab yourself a wheelie bin and you're on your way. Got to give a shout out to Ryan for powder coating these parts for us. He smashed it out, this looks so good. These are our inlet manifold toppers which suit a BA lower manifold. This one has got a Bosch e-throttle adapter welded on top of it. If you're on the fence about using e-throttle on your car and you have the ECU capabilities, definitely jump on board. It takes care of idle control. You can do fun stuff like cruise control, traction control, all that stuff, so get on board. How good does it look powder coated, bro? Hammer hand to the rescue, there we go. Why do they use a paper gasket on the head but then a metal gasket on the inlet and then metal on exhaust?
I don't think paper would work too well on the exhaust, but
Maybe it's like a insulation thing.
yeah, it could be. It's also
Space
the inlet manifolds fall off, so
Yeah, that is a thing with Barras too. Check if your idle's high, check the bolts on your inlet manifold because they do come off. And that's why we're using studs on this too, so we can get a better clamping force on it. So we replaced all the inlet manifold, usually uses bolts, we've replaced them all with studs. We also replaced the studs on the exhaust side too, so. But now we can't get the exhaust manifold off in the car because the exhaust studs are too long. Cough, Alan. You can do that later.
what do you want to take it off for?
Well, what if something happens? What if I've got an exhaust manifold leak or something?
What if
What if this cracks because there's too much force on
What
the...
if the exhaust manifold's leaking because a rod hit it?
Well, then...
And you can just take the engine out first.
I'll give Goleby's a call and looks like we're building an engine.
One thing to take away from working on this engine in this episode, we've built a couple of engines before. We didn't actually do much of the spannering work. It was more of a presentation thing with some professionals. And this is probably the first one I've actually got in there and pulled apart and did things to. And what I can take away from it is it's a very simple engine. It's pretty easy. For a modern engine, it's very easy to work on. There's not many things you can get wrong. The camshafts are easy to change. A lot of six-cylinder, straight six engines with the camshafts that you're dicing with Destiny trying to put cams in them because they can break very easily. This setup is much easier having those finger followers. Very simple timing chain system. And the rest of it's just a very well-matured engine from the 60s, I think. I might get some hate for that, but this is pretty much a direct descendant of a 1960s Falcon engine. So they did well keeping it going, and it's a fantastic engine. The reason why it's so popular is because it's cheap and a very efficient thing, considering how simple it is. This is ready to go back into the car. We were hoping to have a transmission rebuild for you in this episode, but our transmission guy Mark has been very busy claiming victory at Lakeside as the fastest Tirana with a roof rack on the track, and he's got a lot of trophies to polish, and that takes a bit of time. We've got plenty to do though. We've got to get that engine bay ready to receive this fresh new shiny engine, so we'll get stuck into that. If you want to support the show, check out the merch store. We've got plenty of t-shirts and hoodies and whatnot in various designs. And if something that you think you want that looks like it's not there anymore, just email sales and see if we can have it printed for you.
Oh, so there's a code this week, Roger.
There's also, a discount code. It's Roger, R-O-G-E-R. There's no D in Roger. Don't misspell my dog's name. It's one of the only things I get offended by. Check that out. Also, if you could support the businesses that support the show, we'd really appreciate that as well. There is links in the description for those businesses. Thanks for your support, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.
Is that sweat on the inside of your glasses?
Very inconvenient.
You might have to turn that aircon on soon, eh?
Well, winter's over officially.
Oh, officially it is, eh?
Spring.
Oh, yeah. My favourite part of the year. Long walks on the beach. Cold lasagna in the morning.
Today on the Skid Factory, we're giving the Barra and the Turbo 400 some much needed loving. Loving, is that not the right word? And give them a freshen up. Yeah, whoa. Some loving.
When you do that face, you look like Wallace and Gromit. You got the real big mouth. The cheese! We forgot the cheese, Gromit!
I love cheese.
Okay, didn't know that.
Buses run on it, dude.
It's like tugboats and shit.
Making movies, making songs and
Fighting around the world.
What?
Tugger.
Oh, excuse me, I was just...
All right, what about putting blue cheese on top of another slice of cheese? Like cheddar.
No, because country cheese is not actually cheese, it's actually a biscuit.
No, but it's cheese flavoured.
Is it though?
What about
Like
Vegemite?
Twisties are cheese flavoured.
Vegemite on top of Vegemite shapes. Have you had them? They're good.
No, I haven't
They're
had
shaped like Australia.
I have had the Vegemite shapes, but I haven't had Vegemite on them.
I can't have too much cheese though.
You're going poop.
Some people will back me on that.